If someone had told me a year ago that my best friend had a second life, I would have laughed in their face. Emily was the most down-to-earth person I knew. She had this easy way of making everything seem fine, even when it wasn't. When my mom was in the hospital, Emily was the one who stayed up all night with me, texting and calling to make sure I didn't feel alone. She was reliable, steady, and predictable in all the best ways, or so I thought. We met in college, and even though our lives went in different directions after graduation, we stayed close. She moved to a small town about an hour away, and I stayed in the city, but we made it a point to meet up at least once a month. She worked at a library, which seemed perfect for her. Emily always loved books, and she'd light up whenever she talked about her job, telling me about quirky patrons and the peaceful rhythm of her days. Looking back, it all feels like a carefully constructed mask. The first crack appeared last September. I was visiting her place for the weekend, and she had gone out to pick up some groceries. I stayed behind to tidy up the living room, something I always did because Emily wasn't the neatest person. While I was putting away some papers on her coffee table, a letter slipped out of the stack. It was handwritten on thick, expensive-looking stationery and addressed to someone named Sarah. That threw me off. Emily's full name was Emily Harper, and she'd never mentioned a Sarah before. Curious, I skimmed the letter. It was strange. The handwriting was messy, almost rushed, and the tone was formal in a way that felt forced. It talked about a trip to the city, a meeting at some cafe if I didn't recognize, and instructions to bring the package but stay discreet. I remember sitting there, the letter trembling in my hands. It felt out of place, like it didn't belong in Emily's quiet, book-filled life. When she came back, I asked her about it. She didn't seem upset, just confused, and said she didn't know what I was talking about. She laughed it off and said I must have misread something. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But after that, things started to feel off. Emily canceled our next meetup, saying she wasn't feeling well. When I called to check on her, she sounded distracted, like she was only half listening. I tried not to take it personally, but it was hard not to notice the shift. Then one night I got a call from her at 2 a.m. She sounded panicked, asking if I could come get her from the edge of town. She said her car had broken down and she didn't want to call a tow truck. I didn't ask questions, I just grabbed my keys and went. When I found her, she was standing on the side of the road, shivering despite her thick coat. Her face was pale, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid of being followed. I asked her what happened, but she waved me off, saying it wasn't a big deal. I offered to call a mechanic, but she insisted we just leave her car there for the night. I couldn't stop wondering why she'd been out there so late. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. When I asked her again, she laughed and said she'd been visiting a friend and didn't realize how late it was when she left. She avoided eye contact when she said it, and I could feel the lie hanging between us. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I started keeping track of the little things, like the way she never seemed to have her phone on her anymore, or how she avoided talking about her life outside of work. I even followed her once, which makes me feel sick to admit, but I had to know what was going on. She went to a house in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. It wasn't a friend's place, at least not one she'd ever mentioned. She stayed inside for hours, and when she came out, she was carrying a duffel bag that looked heavy. I confronted her the next time I saw her, but she turned it into a joke, saying I was being paranoid. She asked why I cared so much, and when I couldn't give her a good answer, she shrugged it off. Then came the night that changed everything. I was at home, trying to distract myself from the growing pit in my stomach, when I got another late-night call from Emily. This time she didn't sound panicked, she sounded cold. She told me she needed me to come to her house right away, but she wouldn't tell me why. When I got there, the lights were off, and the front door was unlocked. I called out for her, but there was no answer. That's when I saw the blood. It was smeared across the floor, leading toward the basement. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I followed the trail down the stairs, every step feeling like it might be my last. The basement was cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes, but in the corner, there was a tarp-covered shape. Emily was standing next to it. Her hands were covered in blood, and her face was blank, like all the warmth and life had been drained from it. She looked at me and told me to leave. I asked her what was going on, but she didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger. I ran. The next day I called the police, but when they went to her house, it was empty. No blood, no tarp, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Her phone was disconnected, and her job said she had resigned without notice. It's been 6 months, and I haven't heard from her since. I don't know who Emily really was or what she was involved in, but sometimes I think about that letter, the duffel bag, the blood on her hands. I don't think I ever knew her at all. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to end up writing one of these stories. You know, the ones where someone's seemingly perfect life gets ripped apart by a truth too dark to comprehend. But here I am. I don't know why I'm even sharing this, except maybe to warn someone else to look closer at the people they think they know. It's about Megan. She was my best friend, my rock, the person who knew every little detail about me. I met her during my sophomore year of college, and we clicked instantly. Megan had this magnetic energy that drew people in, but she wasn't just popular for her charm. She was also one of the smartest people I'd ever met, always quick with a solution to a problem, whether it was helping me cram for finals or lending me money when my paycheck didn't stretch far enough. We became inseparable. Movie nights, road trips, even planning our futures together, we were always in sync. Or at least I thought we were. It started with small things I brushed off because I trusted her. Like how Megan always seemed to know what I was thinking before I said it. She had this uncanny ability to predict exactly what I'd want or need. At first it felt like proof of how close we were, but sometimes it was unsettling. Like the time I lost my wallet and couldn't even remember where I'd been all day. Megan handed it to me the next morning, saying she found it at the coffee shop we visited last week. I hadn't even mentioned losing it yet. Then there were the nights when she'd disappear for hours, her phone off, no explanation when she got back. I asked her once if everything was okay, and she just laughed it off, saying she liked to take long drives to clear her head. I let it go because I had no reason not to trust her. The first real crack came a few months ago. Megan had asked me to house sit while she was out of town for the weekend. She said she was visiting her family, which wasn't unusual. I spent the weekend at her place, feeding her cat and watching Netflix. It was all pretty uneventful until I opened the wrong drawer in her kitchen. I wasn't snooping, I was looking for a bottle opener. But instead of finding one, I found a stack of photographs. At first I thought they were from some photography class she'd never mentioned. They were black and white shots of people in various places around town, the park, the grocery store, even the library on campus. But then I saw myself. The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. It was me, sitting at my usual table in the library, headphones on, completely unaware. I stared at it for a long time, trying to rationalize it. Maybe she'd taken a photography class and used me as a subject without telling me. Maybe she thought it would be a funny surprise. But then I looked closer at the other photos. They weren't just strangers, they were people I recognized, our friends, professors, even her neighbors. All of them looked like they had no idea they were being watched. I shoved the photos back into the drawer and pretended I hadn't seen anything. When Megan came back, I asked her how her trip was. She smiled and said it was fine. Nothing exciting. She didn't mention anything about the photos, and I didn't bring it up. But from that day on, I started noticing she had a way of knowing things she shouldn't have known. Like when my coworker Sarah broke up with her boyfriend. Sarah hadn't told anyone yet, but Megan casually brought it up during lunch, saying she hoped Sarah was doing okay. When I asked how she knew, Megan just shrugged and said she could tell by the way Sarah had been acting lately. The tipping point came last week. I was walking home from the coffee shop late at night when I felt like I was being followed. I glanced over my shoulder, but the street was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I picked up my pace. When I got home, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. The next morning, Megan texted me, asking if I got home okay. I asked how she knew I'd been out so late, and she said she just had a feeling. That's when I decided to confront her. I went to her apartment, my heart pounding the whole way. She opened the door with her usual bright smile, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. I told her I needed to talk to her, that I needed to talk to her, that I needed to know what was going on. She sat me down and said there was nothing to worry about, that I was imagining things. She said she cared about me, and that's why she kept tabs on me, to make sure I was safe. But the way she said it sent chills down my spine. I asked her about the photos. Her face didn't change, but she said those were just for a project she'd been working on, something artistic. She said she didn't mention it because she knew I'd make it into something it wasn't. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. I haven't spoken to Megan since that day. I blocked her number, moved out of my apartment, and even changed my schedule at work so she wouldn't know where to find me. But the thing is, I don't think it matters. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her in the crowd, just out of the corner of my eye. And last night I found a photograph slipped under my door. It was a picture of me taken from outside my window. I don't know what to do. I feel like no matter where I go, Megan will always know where I am. And the worst part, a small, twisted part of me almost misses her. I've been debating whether to post this, but I can't keep it inside anymore. If I don't write it down, I feel like it'll eat me alive. This is about Jake, my coworker, my friend, someone I thought I knew. We met 3 years ago at the office. I had just started a new job at a small marketing firm, and Jake was the first person to make me feel welcome. He had this way of making everyone laugh, like he carried sunshine in his back pocket. He was the guy you could count on to grab drinks after work, or help you finish a project before a deadline. Everyone liked Jake, and I was no exception. For the first couple of years, we were just work friends. We'd chat about clients, complain about the boss, normal stuff. It wasn't until the company downsized and half the team was let go that we really got close. I was one of the few who stayed, and Jake and I ended up working late nights together to cover the workload. That's when I started seeing a different side of him. It wasn't anything obvious at first. He'd go quiet sometimes, staring out the window like he was miles away. When I'd ask if he was okay, he'd snap back with a smile, saying he was just tired. Once I caught him typing something on his phone late at night, his face lit by the screen. When he noticed me watching, he quickly locked it and changed the subject. I figured everyone has their secrets, so I didn't push. Then one night, a client dinner ran late, and Jake offered to give me a ride home. I usually took the train, but it was pouring rain, and I didn't feel like waiting on a platform for 20 minutes. Jake's car was spotless, almost unnaturally so. Not a single crumb or empty coffee cup, which was odd considering how chaotic his desk at work was. As we drove, the rain turned into a downpour, and Jake missed a turn. He muttered something about taking a shortcut and veered onto a side road I didn't recognize. I asked him if he was sure he knew where he was going, and he laughed it off, saying he took this route all the time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just lost. We ended up on a desolate stretch of road, surrounded by trees. Jake slowed down, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. I asked him why he kept looking back, and he said he thought someone was following us. His voice was calm, but his hands gripped the wheel so tightly I thought the leather might tear. Eventually, he pulled over and told me to stay in the car while he checked something. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the rain. I sat there, staring at the wipers as they swept back and forth, trying to make sense of what was happening. When he came back, he was soaking wet and breathing hard. He said everything was fine, but his eyes told a different story. After that night, things at work changed. Jake started calling in sick more often, and when he did come in, he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I tried asking him if he was okay, but he brushed me off every time. Then I found the file. It was a Friday afternoon, and Jake had left early for a dentist appointment. I was going through some shared folders on his computer, looking for a report we were supposed to finish together. That's when I saw a file labeled Lily my name. I hesitated before opening it, telling myself it was probably just a joke or something work-related. But when I clicked on it, my stomach dropped. It was full of photos of me. Some were from work, me at my desk, in meetings, laughing at the coffee machine. But others were from outside the office. Me on the train, walking home, sitting in a cafe with friends. They were taken from a distance, like whoever took them didn't want to be seen. At the bottom of the folder was a text document. I opened it and found pages of notes detailing everything about my life. My schedule, my favorite places, even conversations I'd had with coworkers. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Go to HR? Call the police? Before I could decide, Jake walked back into the office. He wasn't supposed to be there, and I froze as he approached my desk. He smiled and asked if I was ready to head out. His voice was friendly, but his eyes were sharp, like he knew something was off. I mumbled something about having to finish a report and watched as he left. The moment he was gone, I packed my things and ran out of the building. That weekend, I didn't leave my apartment. I didn't answer my phone, didn't check my emails. I just sat there, replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs. On Monday, Jake didn't show up to work. That afternoon, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph of me, taken from outside my apartment window. I quit my job the next day. That was 2 months ago. I've moved to a new city, changed my number, and started using a different name online. But sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched. I'll catch a glimpse of someone who looks like Jake in a crowd, or hear a voice that sounds like his behind me. I don't know who Jake really was or what he wanted from me, but I know that some people aren't who they seem. If someone in your life makes your skin crawl, trust your instincts. I didn't, and I'll never feel safe again. I've always been the kind of person who keeps my circle small. Growing up, I never had more than a handful of close friends, and even as an adult, I valued depth over numbers when it came to relationships. That's why Aiden stood out so much. He was one of those rare people who seemed like a gift, like someone you were meant to meet. We worked together at a tech startup. Aiden was the systems admin, the quiet guy who stayed in the background, fixing bugs and setting up networks while the rest of us buzzed around with client meetings and presentations. He wasn't shy exactly, but he kept to himself, and most people left him alone. Except for me. We bonded over coffee breaks, complaining about our boss and sharing the occasional inside joke. Aiden had this way of making you feel seen, like every word you said mattered. Over time, we became close. We'd hang out after work sometimes, grabbing drinks or playing video games at his apartment. It wasn't much, but I liked his company. I never really thought about how little he shared about himself. One night, I stayed at the office late to finish a project. Most people had already gone home, and the building was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unnerving when you know it shouldn't be. I was in the break room grabbing a snack when I heard a faint noise coming from Aiden's office. It was weird because Aiden had left hours earlier. I walked over to see what it was, thinking maybe someone had left a radio on or something, but his door was closed. I knocked, just to be sure, but there was no response. That's when I saw the light coming from under the door. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. Whatever it was, I wasn't prepared for what I found. Aiden's office looked completely different. Gone were the cluttered desks and monitors that everyone joked were his natural habitat. In their place was a single, sleek workstation, the kind you'd see in a spy movie. The screens were filled with streams of data, lines of code, satellite maps, security camera feeds. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It felt wrong, like I had walked into someone else's life by mistake. Then I noticed the photos. There were dozens of them taped to the walls, all arranged in neat rows. They were surveillance photos, all of different people. Some I recognized, co-workers, our boss, even the guy who ran the coffee shop downstairs, but others were strangers, their faces blurred by grainy zooms. Then I saw my face. It was a picture of me walking into my apartment building. I had my headphones in, my head down, completely unaware. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of papers on the floor. That's when I heard the elevator ding. Panic set in as I realized Aiden was coming back. I didn't think, I just acted. I turned off the lights, shoved the door closed, and sprinted back to my desk. By the time he walked in, I was hunched over my computer, pretending to work. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his eyes on me. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at home. Every time I saw Aiden, my stomach turned. He was the same as always, cracking jokes, asking if I wanted to grab lunch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I had been in his office. I started piecing things together. The late-night phone calls he always seemed to be on, the times he disappeared for days without explanation, the way he always seemed to know more than he should. It all painted a picture I didn't want to see. One night I decided to follow him. He had mentioned he was going to meet some friends, so I waited until he left the office and trailed him. He didn't take the usual route to the bar we went to after work. Instead, he headed toward the industrial part of town, where the streets were dark and deserted. He walked into an old warehouse, and I waited outside for a few minutes before sneaking in. The place was massive, filled with crates and machinery covered in dust. I stayed hidden behind a stack of boxes, watching as Aiden met with a group of men in dark clothes. They weren't his friends. The men handed Aiden a small black case, and he opened it to reveal something shiny and metallic. It looked like some kind of device, but I couldn't tell what it was from where I was. Aiden nodded and handed them a folder in return, thick with papers. It felt like I was watching a scene from a movie, but this was real. I backed away slowly, trying to get out without being noticed, but I must have stepped on something because one of the men turned around. I bolted, running out of the warehouse and down the street as fast as I could. The next day, Aiden didn't show up to work. That was weeks ago. He hasn't been back since, and no one seems to know where he went. His apartment is empty, cleared out like he was never there. I keep thinking about what I saw, about the photos, the surveillance, the warehouse. I don't know who Aiden really was or what he was involved in, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm not out of his life yet. Sometimes I think I see him watching me from the shadows. Other times I feel like I'm being followed, but when I turn around, no one is there. If you're reading this, take it as a warning. Be careful who you trust. People aren't always who they pretend to be. There was something.